everyone, this is Jerry Nash, History Boy, and today we are doing something a little different for you. We want to tell you the stories from history that are underreported or not really known. That's something we always really like to do. We also believe in...
No, don't worry. It's stories that white folks don't want you to know about. That's what it is.
Exactly.
It's stories it's stories that the white man don't want you to fucking know about. Okay,
it is
keep
true.
Your ass uninformed, unfucking educated. Okay,
it is true. It is true.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I know that this is your show.
It's all good.
When I read stories like this, it fucking pisses me off because that's exactly what I'm fucking talking about, man. These fucking goddamn history books and fucking goddamn public schools, they don't talk about stories like this because they make the white man look bad.
It's true. It's true. And our history books are chock full of propaganda, such as this. And we believe in black representation. We believe in black voices. And we believe Black Lives Matter. And we believe in black history. So we are going to bring that to you today with two of my very good friends, Shoddy and TJ. So today they will bring you probably the most underreported story from history, maybe of all time. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Shoddy and TJ.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Shoddy. They call me Shoddy because my head's bigger than my body. And we got TJ. What's going on, TJ?
What's up? Hey, how's it going? I am TJ, and I just got to say, it is, first off, just such a pleasure to be on HistoryBoiz today to really kind of bring a little bit of awareness around an event that took place in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A lot of sources will call it the Tulsa Race Riots. It's also known as the Black Wall Street Massacre. Really excited to just get a chance to share this story today. Again, Jerry mentioned that it is such an underreported story, and to really have my friend here with Shoddy to talk about this with us today is going to be great. So we're going to kind of start a little bit with kind of where this is all taking place and kind of setting the scene for the situation. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and dive in.
And I want to appreciate Jerry again and the HistoryBoiz for letting me and TJ have our voices on here, even though that the HistoryBoiz are a few months late because, let's be honest, we should have done this in February during Black History Month. I'm kidding. I'm just giving y'all shit to make y'all feel like shit. But no, this is great, and I'm happy to be here.
The first thing to kind of know about this whole situation is that so it's taking place in what modern day would be called Eastern Oklahoma, right? In Tulsa. This particular scenario and place, founded in 1906, was built on Indian territory. And so this is a place where Native American tribes were sort of forced to relocate. And then, of course, there were African Americans who were former slaves at this point, realized that this, of course, takes place post-Civil War, right? These African Americans were integrated into some native tribes. So if you've ever had that question, where we get our good hair from, then you know now.
I'm bald as fuck, so I can't relate to that.
That's fair. That's fair. And so, so the plus side of this is, they were able to acquire land allotted in a place called Greenwood through the Dawes Act. And this particular law gave land to individual Native Americans between 1865 and 1920. So again, since this is post-Civil War, you've got a few different townships, black townships that began to pop up in different places. And Oklahoma happened to be the place that had the most of them. Ultimately, 50-plus black townships would be established in Oklahoma, making it the state that had the most black townships post-Civil War. Now, because this is the case, and now you've got, free slaves, and of course, they're looking for what they're wanting to do, with their lives going forward, this word gets out that this is, that Oklahoma has sort of become a place where it's safe. It's safer rather than, the places that some of them might be. And so, you get a lot of African Americans who are beginning to kind of make their way over to Oklahoma in search of just something better. It is attracting a large amount of people. And one of the particular people that it ends up attracting is a guy named O.W. Gurley. He is a black landowner. And he's pretty wealthy, and he's kind of an interesting guy, I mean, to look at. You know, he's kind of got like this round face, and he wears glasses, and at this particular time it looks like maybe he was going a little bit white, but some of the historical pictures that we've been able to locate with this guy also show him when he was a little bit younger, and I mean, looked kind of like quite the debonair guy, realistically. So I mean, it kind of makes sense if you are a wealthy black landowner, which almost doesn't even happen at this time, right? Then of course you're going to be very distinguished, and you're going to have that particular look.
He looks like Dwayne Wayne from a different world. I'm looking at pictures of him right now without the stash. Looking at a picture of him right now with some glasses. It looks like Dwayne Wayne from. That's not a bad thing too, because Dwayne Wayne was a very handsome man.
Exactly, right? So, I mean, he's got that thing going on, he probably is super fresh, I have to imagine, he's super fresh, and I gotta know that, or I have to believe that whatever he's wearing on any given day is, I mean, it's the flashiest thing that there is out right now, you know what I mean?
Hell
So,
man.
That's what I have to believe that. So he
making
is,
white men jealous up and down the streets of Tulsa, and it's crazy we're talking about because, and we're gonna get more into this, but it sounds like Tulsa should have been what is Atlanta for black people today. Like what Atlanta is for black folks today is what Tulsa should have been. Sounds like.
I can agree with that, and I also think maybe what actually started this whole thing was just how well he was dressed. Let's be real,
He was fresh to death, man. Fresh to death back in the late 10s before the Roaring 20s. Fuck the Roaring 20s, man. You got fucking O.W. Gurley up in the motherfucking house.
So Gurley, he's this educator and an entrepreneur. He comes from Arkansas, and that's kind of where he made that wealth as a landowner. He resigned from, I guess he had a presidential appointment under Grover Cleveland. Now, how an African-American at this time has a role like that, I mean, you just have to imagine what type of person that he is just to be able to have a role like that, right? So that's pretty awesome. So he basically, after he leaves this role, and he's decided to go out on his own and cross the United States in order to participate in the Oklahoma Land Run of 1889. So the idea is that he's going to go buy up some land and then really kind of get, his own thing started. He buys 40 acres, and these were to be sold to coloreds, quote, only. And these 40 acres are, of course, in Tulsa. The property lines, as described by history, says that they were, if you were in Tulsa, the property lines were Pine Street to the north, the Frisco Rail Tracks to the south, Lansing Avenue to the east, and Cincinnati Avenue to the west. So once he gets there, he gets all of his land, and then he starts, working on businesses. And the first business that he goes about opening is sort of like it's like a hotel. They call a rooming house, but it's what we would normally call, or at least modern day call, a hotel. And he's got it. It's right near, it's kind of a dusty trail at this point, not a lot has been made of this land yet.
When you say dusty trail, what do you mean by that?
I mean, there's a lot of dust. You have to sweep constantly.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'm from Texas, and and like Oklahoma, we as a Texan, I really don't count Oklahoma as a state, but I pretend that it's above us, and just like Texas, Oklahoma is very, very dusty. I'm not familiar with Tulsa, but I am familiar with Lawton, Oklahoma, because I did briefly live in Wichita Falls, Texas, and Wichita Falls, Texas is 45 minutes south of Lawton, Oklahoma, and there's a lot of red goddamn dirt up there too. So I'm pretty sure that was dusty as hell.
I'm right there with you. I agree. It's probably very, very dusty.
And it's probably dusty as hell too, because there are probably a bunch of white folks who walk that trail too. Because we all know, historically, white folks are dusty as a motherfucker.
I'm thinking this is more like just at any given moment, there's just a tumbleweed, right?
To each your own, TJ, but go on.
All right. So I gave you guys the property lines. Like I said, this is sort of like a dusty trail, and it's near the railroad tracks. He decides, Gurley that is, decides to name this street, this trail that would ultimately become what he names Greenwood Avenue. And he names it Greenwood after a town in Mississippi. Now, speaking of Mississippi, there were African Americans that were fleeing from Mississippi at the time, right?
There's African Americans who are still trying to flee from Mississippi, but they're still stuck in the goddamn 1860s. But go ahead.
It's been quite the challenge. So you've got African Americans that are fleeing from Mississippi, and they're looking for refuge. And of course, word comes around. They hear about this quote hotel / rooming house that Gurley's got in Oklahoma, in Tulsa. So without quite really having much of a plan, they're headed that way. So they head here to Tulsa, and you have to understand that, of course, at this time, racial persecution, of course, is still running rampant in the South. So the idea that they could get to a place where it just wasn't really there was super attractive, and they, had them all coming that way. So, of course, he makes this purchase. He gets the land. He gets the hotel. Now he's got people kind of, coming through to, head to the hotel. And then, of course, this particular area begins to grow. And it was Oklahoma's Jim Crow laws that accommodated black ownership. So this was really, really great, because that's ultimately what this location would become, is a lot of black-owned businesses. And it really allowed Greenwood to flourish. So let's dig a little bit into what it looked like when it began to flourish. By 1913, you just had all these businesses begin to pop up here in what was kind of referred to at the time as the Greenwood District. We're talking like they've got doctors' offices, they've got law offices, they've got grocery stores. There was a famous theater there called the Williams Dreamland Theater.
All black owned, correct? All black owned.
All black owned.
We had motherfucking black doctors in 1913. but let's keep going on with the story. TJ is going to tell you how y'all fucked that up.
All right, so I am going to talk about that. They've got schools, right? And these schools, you got basketball teams. I actually was able to even check out and find some pictures of some of their teams that they had, and this was a well-established area. They had a place called the Stratford Hotel, and then there were drugstores, cafes, savings and loan banks. You've got a hospital there, multiple barber and beauty shops, because y'all know our hair is important. You know how we do.
Except mine.
Except yours. So kind of like in light of all this success, by 1921, there was one young businesswoman, who described what all of this looked like. Her name was Mary E. Jones Parrish, and she referred to Tulsa endearingly as the Negro metropolis of the Southwest. So even that is just, there's a lot of imagery there when you think of the Negro metropolis, right? So that's a really, really exciting place to be. And this was just such an affluent place for these African Americans. So the challenge, of course, is that outside of the Greenwood area, outside of those property lines, there's still, the neighboring areas around were, of course, predominantly white. And with that being the case, there's still the words would maybe be resentment. There's still some negative feelings, and what you start to see is this is the neighboring people, Caucasians, seeing that suddenly all of these African Americans are becoming successful, right in what, some might say right in their backyard. You know what I mean? And so that kind of built a little bit of racial tension, and for that reason, all these African Americans who lived here in the Greenwood District, they would only shop in the Greenwood areas. They didn't want to, for a couple of reasons. They didn't want to stir any trouble by being anywhere else, of course, but then also it was because J.P. Stratford was a really interesting person. Kind of a guy that wore like a really mean scowl all the time. And this particular person, he had this idea. He ends up coming there too. And he had this idea that it was all about pooling resources. To really support the economic growth and progress of African Americans, we had to pool our resources, which meant supporting each other's businesses. And so for that particular reason, that was why it was all about just shopping in the Greenwood area. Greenwood had people that are, of course, doing really well. And then there's also African Americans with humble means, I mean, there are people who are doing, jobs that I guess a person would describe as maybe more menial jobs like, janitorial work or dishwashing. But even they, all of their monies that they would earn, they would only spend within the Greenwood district. That kind of gives you an idea of the, I guess, the economic mentality or maybe stature that this particular location has, right?
Yeah, it sounds like that Chad Senior and Karen Senior got a goddamn attitude about it, and then, well,
I mean, it's got to be frustrating, right? The idea is there were, you have these people. This is just post Civil War, and then post just like slaves had just been freed like not that long ago, and it wasn't that long ago that people, these same people owned these African Americans. You know what I mean? So to suddenly see them, booming on their own, it is, it's really rubbing some people the wrong way. So, I mean, and all of this is happening right outside of the Greenwood district. So while it's not in the district itself, I mean, people can feel that when they go outside. It's the same way, I mean, you can feel when a person is jealous of you, right? Anybody knows that and can relate to that, You can know when a person doesn't like you, not for anything that you've done, but just maybe something that you have or something that you are doing or progress that you're making in your life. And this is no different. And so that's kind of what the situation was. And so because of that, of course, the affluence, it began to attract the attention of the white people in the areas neighboring Greenwood. And then, like we said, there was just frustration, resentment. They believed at the time, of course, that they are the superior. And so, they're looking at this like, wow, there are people living in the Greenwood district that are even doing better than I'm doing, and that's a scary thought for a person who believes themselves to be superior to someone else. So
the crazy thing about this, I'm sorry to interrupt you, TJ.
You're good.
No, the crazy thing about this was that, slavery wasn't abolished. The abolishment of slavery wasn't even 50 years old by now. So
correct.
For a, and not at all justifying how they felt, but for a group of people, white folks, to see a group of people who they saw as farm equipment not that long ago flourishing and getting to the same level as them, like of course they fucking felt some kind of way.
They definitely felt some kind of way. I actually think that's just the best way to put it. Felt some kind of way. Those racial tensions had been amplified. On February 8th of 1915, there was a film released by a guy named D.W. Griffith, and it was called The Birth of a Nation. The reason this is important is because it basically depicted the Ku Klux Klan as the group that was saving the post-war Civil War South from. The idea was that, all these freed slaves, they're, uncouth, or they're not properly house trained, kind of the idea that they're savages, right? It was basically suggesting that, the Ku Klux Klan was here to basically make order. If you are at all familiar with the Ku Klux Klan, you know that that's not what happens when they decide to make order, but that's their mentality, is that they are making order, right? So they thought that these particular freed slaves, were problematic or immoral or could just really be some type of a plague. Because this film that Griffith made was so popular and spoke directly from a Confederate perspective, it inspired this resurgence of the KKK, which the interesting thing about this now to me was that I truthfully didn't really know, even before understanding all of this story myself, I truthfully didn't really know how far back the KKK really dated. So this was actually kind of really interesting news for me, just reading that, because, to speak of a resurgence suggests that it's been around even before this, right? So that was quite the revelation. But this did cause the African Americans to get nervous. The ones living in Greenwood, when this happens and then everybody's like, talking suddenly again about the KKK. And now here you are, you're living, in your own little paradise, but now your paradise is surrounded, of course, by, you know, a lot of white people who, I mean, for all you know, are all members of this. You, I mean, we don't know, right? So this is going to bring out some feelings of unease amongst, you know, all these African Americans that are living in Greenwood. They're thinking things like, oh no, like, you know, I mean, is this going to lead to some type of violence? Are they going to take voting rights from us? You know what I mean? Like, what's going to happen? And they're not, of course, wrong in having those fears, because then the United States did start to see lynchings begin to accelerate. I won't discuss lynchings if you're not familiar with it today, but if you,
I mean, they're still going on
would
today.
like to know, interestingly enough, they are still going on today. You were right about that, Shad. I would say, I would definitely say that maybe is something to kind of check out. I won't delve too deep into that, but let's just say it's specific acts of violence that are just historically linked to racism and the Ku Klux Klan and things like that, just historically linked to all of that. So definitely something to check out if you have questions about what that might be. This led to something that was referred to as Red Summer of 1919. This was when a bunch of anti-black riots came really in waves, just hitting the country, virtually every major city, pretty much, Tulsa's included. Like, you have all of these anti-black riots, and I mean, if you really compare this thought to, you know, present day situations, you know, the types of riots that we have now, I mean, that what is described now as violence at a riot was quite different than what the violence would be described at these riots, these anti-black riots. I mean, we're talking about, you know, not just the rioting, but these are people that are dying like constantly at these riots. It's very violent, and it's, I mean, just imagine all of the worst possible things. I'll put it that way.
I mean, white college students get fucking white college students. I mean, they riot when their football or basketball team wins the national championship, and they start burning cars and flipping them and shit. So I can't even imagine what this fucking looks like.
Exactly. Actually, that's probably the best way to say it, because this was absolutely some craziness. And I mean, it was just so naturally, Greenwood is absolutely shaking in their boots right now. You know, they're nervous, they're scared, but everybody's walking on eggshells, and not that they're not still enjoying the lives that they have, but it's just in a cautious format. Taking just a second here to kind of talk about this Red Summer quote. So basically what happened was from the late part of winter until early fall of 1919, these race riots were happening. There were specific acts of white supremacist terrorism that were just, I mean, running rampant across dozens of U.S. cities. The reason that this was sort of a big deal is because where they're living, like in Oklahoma, it had been when they very first came there that everything had quieted post-Civil War. That was what attracted them to come there, right? Like, the racial tension was almost nil in this particular location there. So when they show up, it's like, oh, you know, this is great, but now suddenly all of these things are happening, and it's building the same type of fear that they had from the places that they fled already.
Yep.
So that's the reason why this is kind of, you know, it's kind of important to note. And so you see this now become the white rioting against blacks as a norm. This is what's just happening. So there was a civil rights activist, an author, and field secretary for the NAACP. His name was James Weldon Johnson, and he's the person that coined the term Red Summer. And red was, of course, you know, the operative word being that there was a lot of blood. Imagine you can probably gather that from the description that we've given. But it was just mounting violence taking place across those several months. And this particular person, though, was kind of cool. He helped organize some peaceful protests against racial violence later in the year. Now, as peaceful of a protest as you can manage when there are people that are fighting against you, you know what I mean? So, but that's kind of just a cool little tidbit about that, and really where that term comes from. Now, kind of zeroing in on what we're actually going to be talking about today. We kind of want to give you a couple of people that are the players, and specifically going to start with a guy named Dick Rowland is his name. And
Dick.
now, yes, Dick Rowland. He actually chose that name, as a matter of fact, because to
his real name isn't Richard. He chose Dick.
Correct. His real name actually was something along the lines of Jimmy Jones, right?
Oh,
which, I mean, is pretty far away from, the name that history knows him by. But his real name was something like Jimmy Jones, and it is really not known where he was born. And you have to realize, and that's really something to stop and talk about for a second, because you have to realize this is actually extremely common coming from the days of slavery. There are a lot of things that are just not known because their history, African Americans, their history wasn't really kept. You have to understand that many of them, while they have families, don't spend their entire lives with their families. You remember that slaves were bought and sold and traded, and you're not spending your whole life with families to know who is who to you, or where you belong, or where you came from. Like, there's a lot of questions around this, and so bringing that, kind of comparing that to present day, you might know that, I don't know if you've ever heard of any of your, African American peers talk about doing a genealogy where they're going back and they're looking at their family tree and where they come from. And what you'll notice is that, in comparison to, our white peers, we do not have really a lot of history once you get to slavery. There's a lot of missing branches on those family trees. No one knows really where anything came from because our names were mostly stricken from us. We're taking the names of whoever owned us.
Yep.
It's difficult to know just really where you come from and who you're related to and how all of that works to know, a lot of things about yourselves, which is really, I guess, kind of cool because now we have, these different programs that what are they called? Like 23andMe or so, we have these programs now where people are able to find so much more information about where they come from and different things that are in their blood or whatever than we've ever been able to do before. So, this is pretty exciting news, especially for people, who are African American. So it wasn't really known where he was born, but it was around 1908 that he found himself in an orphanage alongside two sisters. Now, just like what I was saying, these sisters never pop up in any of this again. So you have to imagine that he probably was separated from these sisters. So, just imagine that they all were orphans together, and then he probably never saw his sisters again. But this took place when they were in the orphanage. This took place in a small place called Veneta, Oklahoma. He ended up getting adopted by an African-American woman named Damie Ford, who was supposed to be a very wise person. Not a ton is really known about her either, but from
of course not, because she's a black woman.
Correct. So basically, what happens is they move to Tulsa. Damie takes Jimmy and they move to Tulsa because she wants to be close to her family, and her family's last name is Rowland. Predominantly. So he, of course, takes the last name of her family. So now he is Jimmy Rowland, but then he decides to pick his own first name, basically. And so that is what happened. He decided to pick the name Dick, and he went by that as his first name. So that gave us the historical Dick Rowland that we know of. He went to one of the high schools there in Greenwood. It was called Booker T. Washington High School. And he eventually dropped out. There was a wealthy part of downtown Tulsa, and he dropped out because he wanted to go get a job. And he did find a job. He basically became a shoe shiner for wealthy Caucasians. He went to do that, and I'm sure he made just enough for it to be a living and everything like that. The thing was, segregation is still a thing at this time, so naturally they're African Americans are not able to use the same restrooms and water fountains and things like that whites are able to use. So where he was working, he would have to go next door. There was a building next door, and there was, on the top floor of this building, there was a restroom that was reserved specifically for African Americans. So, I mean, it seems kind of, like I would get annoyed personally if I had to like run next door every time I needed to use the restroom, but this is what he had, right? And he did that day in and day out.
If I was alive back in the day, I would go into white only bathrooms and just piss on the toilet seat on purpose, not wipe it off, then run out.
I mean, I can't imagine what the punishment might be for something like that, though.
Well, right? They wouldn't catch me. There was no cameras back then. Shit.
I guess I can't really argue with that.
I'm just fucking saying, man. I mean, that's how much of a fucking asshole I am. I mean, here's the thing about me, like, if you're going to be an asshole to me, I'm going to be an asshole to you right back. And that is some nasty ass bullshit I do. Like, if you're going to have a whites only bathroom in a convenient area, like they probably did back in the day, I'm going to run in there when I really need to take a piss and release, okay? And probably piss on the seat and not wipe it off and run the fuck out so I won't get caught.
This sounds so much like you are just describing the Rosa Parks of bathrooms.
Well,
I mean, I'm not mad at you. Take it as stand is what it's about. You know what I mean? So, and I love that.
Just saying.
So he would have to go next door to this building. It was called the Drexel Building, and it was located on Main Street there. And he'd have to go, to the top floor of this place to use the coloreds only restroom. We're going to talk a little bit about a woman named Sarah Page.
White she-devil!
I mean, okay.
Sorry.
So there was a woman named Sarah Page, and she was, at the time of all of these events, 17 years old. Sarah Page is really, really interesting for this reason, because where she comes from, it suggested that she came from Kansas City, that she might have been coming from a divorce, and, decided to move away from that life and start a new life in Tulsa. And so, here she is at, 17 years old. She's got this job, and lo and behold, the job that she decides to grab is at the Drexel Building as an elevator attendant. So she is the elevator attendant, and one day, of course, she is working when Dick has to, take a break from his job, doing the shoe shining and everything like that, and go next door. So it's important to note that these events are taking place on May 30th of 1921, and all of it will go into June 1st of 1921. So that kind of lets you know what time period we're at right here. Now, there are some people that say that maybe Sarah and Dick had known each other prior to this, and some even suggesting that maybe they were at some point romantically involved. It does not seem that way, certainly from, the accounts that we have, but we'll get to in a bit here why that might have become a thing and why people might have gathered that or maybe assumed that based on kind of how things turn out. But let's go ahead and talk about the event itself. This day, May 30th in 1921, we have our friend Dick. He's working as normal. He needs to make use of the restroom in the Drexel Building. He goes there, and he is, of course, using the elevator, where he is met by Sarah Page, working that day. Who knows what kind of day she's already had, right? I mean, I don't know how exciting, being in the elevator is most of the day, but, if there was anything to be frustrated about, I imagine maybe she was already a little frustrated.
And then, okay, go ahead. I will refrain from my comments until after you get to that part, but go ahead.
Okay. Now, from there are a couple of different accounts of how this may have happened, But what a lot of it sounds like, or most of the narrative seems to be, is that as he stepped into the elevator, he tripped or he fell in some way. And if anybody, I mean, if you can think about this and you can think about yourself and really, kind of understand this from your own personal experience, anytime you trip or you fall, it's natural to grab at something to support yourself and hold yourself from falling. You kind of reach up to grab something and then you generally miss it and you fall on your face. If you're me, I don't know about anybody else, but if you're me, you just generally miss it. But in this particular situation, he basically tripped or something walking into this elevator and reaches out just to, grab something for support. And unfortunately, the something that he grabbed was Sarah. So if you can imagine, I mean, gosh, even taking out everything that's happening here, and you think about it, even if a situation like this were to happen modern day, I mean, this is a weird and sudden thing for a woman to just be suddenly and uninvitedly touched by a man that she does not know, right? So, I mean, that already is a situation in and of itself. Now, when you add this extra layer of her being a white woman, him being a black man in 1921, this is like, clearly you're attacking me, is how this is going to be perceived, right? And so she lets out a very audible scream. And when this happens, he's startled too, because he's kind of like, I didn't mean to do this. And then when he's realizing what happened, now he's scared too, and they're both just it's like one of those comedic moments on movies that you see where just both people are screaming because no one knows what's going on, and he lets out a startled response as well. And then his natural response is he decides that he's gonna flee the elevator, like, let me get away from here. Probably a lot of that is going to have to do with the fact that, I mean, he's afraid. He knows what the implications is of this situation, and he knows what it could mean for him. So, I mean, he's scared. He's going to run. That's what we do when we're scared.
I would be too. Shit.
Yeah. So he flees the elevator. Something really interesting about that is we're able actually to find a little newspaper clipping of exactly how this story was reported. So I'm going to quote this newspaper clipping. It's going to take a moment here, but just so you can kind of get an idea. This was a clipping from the next day, May 31st, from the Tulsa Tribune. The headline reads, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." So what this says, and this is how the paper described this event: a Negro delivery boy who gave his name to the police as, quote, Diamond Dick, but who has been identified as Dick Rowland, was arrested on South Greenwood Avenue this morning by officers Carmichael and Pack, charged with attempting to assault the 17-year-old white elevator girl in the Drexel building early yesterday. He will be tried in municipal court this afternoon on a state charge. The girl said she noticed the Negro a few minutes before the attempted assault, looking up and down the hallway on the third floor of the Drexel building as if to see if there was anyone in sight, but thought nothing of it at the time. A few minutes later, he entered the elevator, she claimed, and attacked her, scratching her hands and face and tearing her clothing. Her screams brought a clerk from Renboog's store to her assistance, and the Negro fled. He was captured and identified this morning both by the girl and the clerk, the police say. Rowland denied that he tried to harm the girl, but admitted he put his hand on her arm in the elevator when she was alone. As you can tell from what the paper published, this sounds like she has fantasticized the story a little bit, saying that he tore at her clothes and that he basically was just being super violent. She even added this part saying that she had seen
Karen too. That's what she's being.
She was kind of being a Karen.
Kinda. TJ, yeah. Don't be fucking nice to this bitch. Okay? Don't be fucking nice to this bitch. Don't even kinda. He was being a full-blown motherfucking Karen.
We have a bit of a Karen on our hands. And so basically, she mentions that he, she saw him maybe looking both ways, like he was looking to make sure the coast was clear before he tried to step in. Obviously, making this sound as if this was a planned and purposeful, premeditated attack on her. And that's how the news is displaying this. Well, of course, this is all of Tulsa that's getting this news, right? So this isn't just Greenwood. This is, I mean, all of the neighboring whites are getting this and seeing this. And this is exactly, really, if you think about it, this is what they were waiting on, right? If you've ever had a frustration with a person and you thought, oh, like, eventually I'm going to have to confront them, and you were just waiting on a reason to do it, that's what this is. That's what this is, right? So this was sort of the catalyst that set off the next few events that we'll be talking about. This whole situation distressed the blacks because obviously... So when Dick was arrested, Dick gets arrested, of course, as the paper mentioned and everything, and he is at the municipal court, he's in the courthouse, and he's jailed. Well, a group of of angry people, angry Caucasians from the neighboring communities, come to the courthouse, and they're demanding that he be handed over to them. Now, we know exactly what the plan is, right? For them to ask that, it's presumably that he would be lynched. So you've got the people of Greenwood and who want to protect their own, as is natural. They show up to the courthouse and they come ready for this to be a confrontation, the type of confrontation that everybody kind of knows what it's going to be. So, they're distressed, they're worried, they show up, and they show up armed. So this little skirmish takes place, and we're calling it skirmish. It is believed that shots were fired, and there were a total of about 12 people that died just in this confrontation. And now the whites are really mad because 10 of those people were theirs. And so now you have to imagine this is the point of implosion, right? This is where it's as some people say, it's about to go down. So once this little skirmish kind of breaks, the African Americans, they retreat back to Greenwood. Dick remains in holding. He's still there in the municipal courthouse being jailed. Now, here's the thing. He was in the jail. He was in the safest place that he could have been for all of the next events. The whites went back to their communities, spread the word of what had just happened, and they're, it's also just, you've got the news that just came out, right? That particular newspaper and that story. And so everybody's read this and you're going back and, it's friends and family. They're collecting everybody. And it's reported to be like thousands. It's a lot of people. And they just descend upon Greenwood, angry, relentless. It's insane. They are looting homes. They are burning down buildings. They are killing at point blank. They are killing black men, women, children on the spot.
Children.
I mean, just walking.
Children. Did y'all fucking catch that?
Children.
Women and children.
They did not care. It was literally just.
We in the 1900s and y'all motherfuckers are still savages.
It was a rough time. It was definitely a rough time for, to say the least. And so it's actually even said there are even some accounts that say that they had small airplanes that are flying by just like dropping firebombs on the town. I mean, that's how just nasty and insane this whole thing is. It's literally just looks like a war zone, except these are just people. And that is really, really a scary thought. So this is a total of about 35 blocks, more than 1,200 residences being destroyed during what ended up being, it's some things say 16, some things say 18, but we know either 16 to 18 hours worth of an attack. So, I mean, with this happening and having started on May 31st of 1921, it's bleeding all the way over into June 1st of 1921. So that's where you'll hear some different accounts on the date that this happens. It's because it actually transpired on both of those dates. It left 800 or more injured, but when you're talking about the tallies for death, the official number of death was at the time, their official number was 36 people. Historians have since discovered that those numbers were entirely too low, though. Well, at one point they were saying it was closer to possibly 150, but then later, and we'll get to this in a bit once we get to, how this is impactful for history and things like that. But later, they discovered that there's probably closer to like 300 people that died in this entire situation. And it left, thousands of people homeless, having to rebuild. And, they do have, with this grisly scene of just like fire everywhere and dead bodies, they have firefighters that show up on the morning of June 1st. But even then, all it is at this point is just mostly dead bodies and then a bunch of, the neighboring white people, they're here and they are just ravaging the place. Looting everything that they can find, taking everything that all of these black people worked so hard to build for themselves and their families, taking everything. And it's a grisly scene. So these firefighters come, they're told to leave, and they're threatened with gun violence if they don't. That's how angry this mob is.
Wait, what was that?
They're literally...
Are you saying that white folks are threatening a firefighter is now like as the same level as a cop? Are you saying that white people are threatening firefighters, not black folks, but white people?
That's what happened.
See, this is exactly what I'm fucking talking about. Not talking about on here, but just fucking talking about in general, man. Like this shit's got me fucked up, TJ. This shit's really got me fucked up. But go ahead. I'm gonna save my comments. I'm gonna save the rest of my comments for the end. But go ahead. Go ahead with the narration.
Right, and I will tell you this. You're absolutely not wrong in feeling that way. And the scariest part of all of this is exactly the reason why we're talking about it, is because for something with this gravity, something like this to have happened that so many people don't know ever happened, just really helps you understand that history in so many ways is a specific narrative that is woven by who is in power to weave it, right? So that's kind of really what, we come away from this with, but let's continue here. So after this happens with the firefighters, the National Guard show up, and they're just like trying to declare martial law. But at this point, really everything is subsided. Nothing's really happening anymore. They did help put out the fires, according to history. They did help put out those fires, and they did end up imprisoning many Black Tulsans. Can you imagine that your entire city, or really, I guess, your neighborhood just got burned down. Most of them are just dead bodies in the streets right now. People are looting you, and somehow you're the one that gets arrested. You're the person that gets imprisoned. That's what happened here. So they're imprisoning them. It's said that there were thousands of men and women that were under their armed guard at that point. Once the whole thing calmed down, at this point, it's dying off. It's probably about somewhere between like noon and 2 p.m. the next day, June 1st, and everything has kind of died off. Now, this is where things get a little unclear, because one way or another, somehow, all of the charges get dropped against Dick, okay? Now, there are some sources that say that maybe this took until like the following September, but then other sources that suggest that this was like immediate, and also saying that it was possible that Sarah Page had something to do with this, as if she had decided herself to drop these charges, or she was the person that asked for them to be dropped. There's a lot of conflicting information on exactly how this happened, but one way or another, those charges against Dick do end up getting dropped.
Sounds like white guilt to me.
Could have been. You can never really tell, and it's
possibly.
Possibly,
I'm not going all in saying this white guilt, but fuck, it could have been. Also, you can. It's also
if you think about it, and this isn't just this particular time in history, but I mean, even modern day or really any time that you visit in history, the challenge with people is sometimes people do and say things out of frustration or out of what they think they're supposed to be doing as a reaction to something, not really understanding the gravity of what they're doing or saying. And then when something plays out in front of them and they see now exactly how they're responsible for it, I mean, it's easy for a person to maybe come across a change of heart, you know, or realize that they are absolutely at fault for, you know, maybe something crazy happening. And if that's what Sarah felt, you know, we'll never know. But if that's what she felt, then that would 100%, you know, kind of be a reason why she might have decided, hey, you know, drop these charges. Like, you know, he doesn't deserve to be locked up, whatever the case may be. And then again, as I was mentioning earlier, after that happened, it's really sort of the last we really hear of Sarah Page. She leaves Tulsa and just disappears after that. There literally aren't really any further records of whatever happened to her, but she decides to leave Tulsa. I'm imagining, why would you stay there after that has happened and you're a large part of it, right? It's, you know, I can understand her deciding to leave and just, you know, getting somewhere else, and she's off on the road again, trying to start a new life again. So I guess, you know, that's probably what happened there. But there even was, and let me just kind of look at this really quick, because there even was another clipping that talks about, this was right after this happened, or a couple of days. This is June 11th of 1921, this newspaper clipping. And, you know, they open it, really the headline is nothing more than just loot, arson, murder. So they wrapped it up pretty well, I'd say. And they talk about that the damages were somehow around $4 million. And y'all need to think, like, in 1921, $4
million of damage. And
that's like a lot.
What, you said 1921?
1921.
1921. $4 million in damages in 1920. What was the minimum wage in 1921?
I would just suffice it to say that it's not very much, because I mean, when you're thinking of that far back, I mean, there are people that bought like giant, amazing homes, and I mean, it's nowhere near like, you know, today when we go buy a home and maybe it's like a $200,000 home or something like this. Like, people are buying these giant homes for just like, I mean, like a third of that, maybe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So really that just helps you wrap your head around how much damage they would have had to do for it to amount to $4 million, right? Like, I mean, that's, at this time, that's just really, it's really just a crazy, crazy thought. So we did get a little bit of information about the minimum wage, and it looks like the minimum wage in 1921, there wasn't really a minimum wage, but you're talking that families are making like $2,300 a year.
Wow, and they did $4 million damages.
$4 million worth of damage. That is what the newspaper on June 11th, 1921 reported. $4 million of damage. Like, to me, that's really mind-blowing, because, again, I'm thinking, like, you have to just demolish, if I'm thinking what that equates to in modern times, like, $4 million at that time, everything that it covers, like, if you translate $4 million to, like, how much that is now, I'm thinking you're probably going to reach somewhere around, like, $150 to $200 million.
Jesus Christ, man. See, man, I'm sorry. Like, that really fucking angers me. Like, I know that was 99 years ago, but that really fucking angers me.
$4 million in damage would basically equate to about $53 million in damage today. I mean, there are blockbuster movies that make this kind of money. This, you know, that's really kind of how best we can wrap our heads around how they managed to do this amount of damage. It's really, really crazy when you think about it. So, you know, yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, so when Dick Rowland was exonerated, I say, but basically when the charges were dropped, he, just like Sarah did, immediately decides to leave Tulsa. It's really not surprising that either one of them would decide to leave, realistically. I mean, again, it's probably not going to be safe for you there in the first place, right? Going forward. So it's best to just take off and go somewhere. Remembering Damie Ford, his sort of, the mother that adopted him, she actually has been quoted basically saying that he left for Kansas City. So this is why we think that maybe people got, or maybe these historic rumors happened that Sarah and Dick may have been somehow romantically involved, because it seems interesting that he would leave for Kansas City when he knows that that's where she's from and she disappeared. So it almost seems as if maybe he was going to find her or something like that. So now we don't know if that's what happened, and who knows if he even knew that that's where she went, because she kind of disappeared. I mean, the newspaper literally said, after it said of the $4 million, it literally just said Sarah's nowhere to be found. That was literally the next thing it says after that. So if he doesn't know, it might just be that was maybe the next place that he thought was kind of safe. We'll never know. We weren't there, and we certainly wouldn't know what he was thinking. But if that's where he went, that's probably where those rumors came from. Now, in addition to that, maybe possibly supporting that same rumor, there is also further information. Supposedly, there was an interview with, quote, a mystery relative of Rowland's. Right now, no one knows what that means. And mystery relatives, I mean, how close is a mystery relative, right? Like, I mean, it could have been one of those sisters that never wanted to be identified. It could have also been like somebody's third and half cousin removed. I mean, we don't really know how close these people are, right? But it's a, quote, mystery relative. They apparently said that the two of them did meet up in Kansas City. Him and Sarah did meet up in Kansas City, then went their separate ways. And this same particular mystery relative said that Dick Rowland ultimately died somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. We'll never know, but these are the things that, these are the hearsay about, where both of them went. And it's just such an interesting thing to me. It's very intriguing because how they sort of just both melt away into history after this whole thing happens. And there's just not a lot of information to know what happened to them specifically. You would think that somebody would think to follow this, but and as we're about to get into, a lot of that just comes from nobody really wanted to tell the story again, which meant people were not seeking to find these people. In the following years, the Black Tulsans rebuilt Greenwood. The ones that were left and who had only been injured and things like that. And then I'm sure, there were probably more that came. If they, word at this time obviously travels pretty slowly. When you think about Juneteenth, which we have going on, you think about, Juneteenth is this. Yes, what's up?
What was the race demographics at this time? Because we did lose a lot of ancestors in this riot and in the destruction of Black Wall Street. And I just want to know what were the demographics in Tulsa at the time, because I feel like that's a big factor, because, only 12-13% of African Americans make up the demographics in this country. And I know that this is just one city, but I'm really interested if we can find out what the race demographics were in Tulsa around this time.
So what we know about that, Shoddy, is that basically the population growth over time. So basically, like, let's say 1910. This is going by decades, right? Like census by decades.
Yeah.
So in 1910, this population growth was up at like 1,200%, right? And then 1920, and we know that this happened in 1921, that population growth was still up, but it was up by 300%. But then
in 1930,
in 1930, it changes and it's only up by 96%. So it's like a pretty big drop. And then after that, when you start looking at 1940, it just it kind of just stands still and then
plateaus.
And yeah, right. So it looks as if the population growth slowed down a lot. Probably, I mean, again, word travels. Maybe I don't really know exactly what that might mean, but it might mean maybe people aren't coming there anymore. It also might mean that because
of course not, because because the city had fucking bombs dropping on it.
I mean, yeah, that's a pretty good. I'm not a big fan of bombs, so I mean, like there you go. I mean, it could totally be just when everything pretty much went to hell like that. I mean, it's certainly not growing at least during those decades.
You know what fucking pisses me off? It pisses me off that we glorify bombing Japan in World War II, but fucking crickets when bombs get dropped on fucking Tulsa on fucking black people. That's what fucking pisses me off.
It is a real reason to be pissed off too. I mean, and yet, it is a part of history that remains to be sort of swept under the rug. I mean, it's really only recently that people started finding out about this. And actually, let me kind of get through the rest of this here, because I'll tell you about that as a matter of fact. So, as can be guessed, you have, the Black Tulsans, who's left or who might be coming in, whoever they may be. They are rebuilding Greenwood. But of course, now there's more racial tension and more harsh segregation. I guess there's like a newly established Oklahoma branch of the KKK. Now they're growing in power and strength. Of course they are, because, I mean, people see this kind of stuff, and the people who really have that type of hate in their hearts, it's just like, this is exciting for them. It's retribution. They're horrible and they should have been slaves in the first place. And, it's all of this kind of a thing, right? So this is where that mentality is fed.
Yeah.
And comes to feed. Now here's where things start getting sketchy. Remember when I read off to you the newspaper, and I read how the story went down in the newspaper?
Yeah.
So the newspaper removes this story, right?
Of course they do.
So it's removed, and there are no public ceremonies that happen or memorials at this time. Like, nothing happens, and they remove it from the newspaper. It would later be discovered by scholars that there were never any records either in police or state archives regarding this event. Interesting, right? So once you gather that, you can kind of understand where this is going. It's for that reason that until recent times it was a little known event. It wasn't showing up in history books. There was nothing in police or state archives that, like, why is there not a record of that, right? Whose idea was it to say we don't need to write this up? I mean, and somehow in the same ways that you hear this now, I mean, if you think of, how this translates to modern day, and you think of the situation with, for instance, Breonna Taylor, where, she's killed in her home by, the cops. And
no cops have been arrested. I'm glad that justice is being served for black men, but what about black women?
Well, both. What? I mean,
I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Justice hasn't been served yet. Those cops have been arrested, but zero cops for Breonna Taylor
have been charged. Is that where you're going?
Yes, zero.
Correct.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to get off track of what we're talking about.
No, not at all. I mean, the reason. So let me be clear. The reason that I brought Breonna Taylor up is because how that relates to this is her situation. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this, but one of the things that was really sketchy about her situation was that after the cops come in, kill her as she's sleeping in the bed and things like this. Well, the police report literally said there were no injuries, and she's dead. So that's how I'm likening it to this, is because when a narrative is bad, what we see is people spin that narrative. And that's what's happening, that's what's happened here with this particular event, is it's just, well, if you sleep under the rug and nobody looks that way and you just pretend like it's, you put a Band-Aid on it and you keep it moving, right? No one knows it's there. And that's a problem. And it is important to mention what I just mentioned about Breonna Taylor, because we can see that these problems, while certainly not at the scale of what this was, but these problems are still present today, right? Now, with the help of some scholars, this was in 1996, so like 75 years after this whole thing happened. They held a service at the church. It's obviously rebuilt at this time. One of the churches that was a part of Greenwood called Mount Zion Church. So there was a service held there. there was a memorial placed in front of the Greenwood Cultural Center commemorating the historical event, right? Now, the next year, the following year, in 97, there is created an official state government commission whose sole purpose was investigating the Tulsa Race Riot. Mostly because it took everybody that long to be like, why don't we really know this much about this? So there's literally a commission now whose job is to check into this. So then, fortunately, by 2001, the commission had determined new numbers for the casualties in the event. And this is what I was referring to earlier, that between 100 and 300 people had actually been killed, with about 8,000 people having been made homeless, is what their findings were. Now, I don't know if that 8,000 people is just black people. I don't know if that means that there were other people too, that became homeless, but that's kind of numbers that these people came up with. And as a result of their efforts, and of Oklahoma's Department of Education, that this topic is now required in Oklahoma history classes since 2000. And it does now appear in Oklahoma history books only since 2009.
Wow, for 11 years.
Yeah. So isn't it really crazy when you think back on that? It only has now showed up in just like Oklahoma history books in 2009.
It needs to show up in every history book in the fucking country because this is important. This is important because what do we hear as African Americans? What do we hear all the time? You have the same opportunities as us. And what did we do? What did we do when we created those same exact opportunities? They got fucking butthurt and they destroyed it.
And that is exactly why this event needs to be talked about. Exactly the reason. Because this has been, and this is the time, because, this right now, as far as this movement that's been going on as far as Black Lives Matter, it has helped, because we have so many allies, it's helping the platform right now be a collective voice that's heard. And when people ask what conversations need to happen now, these types of things need to be parts of the conversation, because this is what people don't understand when you tell them things in terms like systemic racism, right? So these are the type of things that this is all historical. It's been happening for so long that it's ingrained. People don't even know that they should know about this. Do you know what I mean? So it's quite the event, and that's pretty much, all that we've got for you all, as far as this goes. But there are definitely resources now that you can find information about this. Google is always going to be your friend, right? But there's books to read. I would say though, to my understanding, there's a movie in the making about this, as a matter of fact. That I believe is supposed to come out next year in 2021, if I'm understanding correctly. But it's taken all this time for this much attention to come around it, but it's come around, and since it's come around, it's really become a point of contention for a lot of people, and I think that's why it's being addressed so aggressively now, one way or the other. I'm really just happy that we had this opportunity to discuss this and really share this whole historic piece with all of the listeners for History Boys. And if this is something that you haven't heard of, maybe even talk to your friends or family or whoever it is about this, and really make that conversation happen. The only way that we can change our the present and the future is we always have to understand our history, right? And if people teach us that since you're a kid, you have to know what happened to history to know how not to repeat it. And so I think that would really just be my closing thoughts. Do you have anything else that you might add with that, Shoddy?
Like you said, this is something that needs to be mandatory, and because this is American history. When stories like this aren't taught, then that's when you get ignorant questions like, well, you have the same opportunity as us, and and that's where the implicit bias comes in. These white people in the late 1910s, early 1920s saw black people, and like I said earlier, I don't think it was barely like 50 years after slavery. It wasn't even 50 years after slavery was abolished. They saw these people have the same exact opportunity as them. They were creating wealth for their community, and all they needed was one legitimate, in their point of view, legitimate reason to take all of that away, and they did it.
You're absolutely not wrong. So, yeah, I'm just really glad that we got the opportunity to talk about this. And Shoddy, thank you a lot for, helping me really discuss this whole thing. I know it's not the easiest thing to talk about, of course, but I'm glad that we did it.
Oh man, well, thank you for inviting me to come on here and talk. And thanks to the History Boys.
Thank you to the History Boys for having us. Absolutely.
They're a group of they're some of my favorite white boys here in Seattle.
We had a lot of fun. We'll see you next time. Or I guess we won't. Whatever.